Let's call to order the April meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission, 6:02 p.m. So let's take the agenda amendments and the announcements together. Sue, I know you might have a couple announcements just about current projects.
Yeah, I do. First thing, I have passed the parking signage assessment on to the assistant town manager after the last meeting, and with RTM and whatnot, he has received it, hasn't really gotten too far into it when we spoke last week. So it was well received by the office. You know, I think that the town manager is looking for some improvements. So yeah, just nothing to report on that right now. I wanted to let you know, and actually Dan, Gary, and Prudence are on here. We have reviewed the walk bike master plan consultants. Staff is in the middle of making a recommendation, and the subcommittee members should receive it tomorrow. We received 4 applications. We interviewed 3 firms, and they were all really solid. So yeah, I'll send the recommendation out. I don't have anything to announce on who the firm is yet, but it was a good problem. It's a tough problem to have. Let's see. The tax stabilization was the other article that the Planning Commission had supported that came out of RTM. I don't know what the timeline is for that. Staff will be working on it, but I don't have a firm timeline on that at this point. And then the last announcement I wanted to make, and kind of an invitation for those that might be interested, is there's the Vermont Bike Walk Summit is going to be held May 6th in Middlebury. It's a full day event. If there were 2 planning commissioners that want to attend, should be able to help pay for that, or be able to pay for those registrations. So I don't know how you want to handle that, Tom, but it is a full day on Friday. I think it starts at 8:30, but I can send you a link to the conference so that you can see the speakers, but it's on topic to our master planning efforts. So Steve and I will be attending. I know Prudence has an interest in going.
Where is that going to be located, Sue?
It's going to be in Middlebury.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have to MapQuest that. That's a weekend or weekday?
It's a weekday. It's a Friday.
A Friday, okay. Early morning, all day, pretty much.
There'll probably be some carpooling going up there. I just want to say I've attended that a couple of times in the past. It's really good. It's very energizing. It's like got a lot of like really useful media information and stuff. At least in the past, it has good speakers. So just I would love to go, but I'll pay for it myself. If there's a couple other commissioners that want to go, I'm happy to pay my own way. I think it's $50 to register.
I carpool with you.
Dan, do you have any interest in going?
I do. I'm just consulting my master calendar here. Yeah.
Master calendar.
It's got potential. Yeah, since it's a Friday, I tend to leave Fridays a little bit open-ended. I can shift just one thing around, and I could go. Yeah. Just so happens I'll be actually up in Montpelier earlier this week. So I mean it's Wednesday. I'll be up there, and yeah, might be able to do it. I mean, I should.
Okay, so it sounds like those 3 bike walk subcommittee members can figure that out with Sue after
and
this meeting.
I should be able to pay for all 3. It is the plenary, I think, speaker starts at 9, registration at 8. So it'll be an early morning from Brattleboro. It's about at least 2 hours. Yeah, I'll reach out to all of you tomorrow with the recommendation for the consultant as well, and we can square that up. It doesn't, I can probably register the week of too if your schedule is a little fluid at this point.
Awesome road trip. Love it.
Okay, great. And you all will have to, it'll be great if you can report back, with
I'll
kind of
take
the
pictures, Tom.
main takeaways and how that went. Sue, if you don't have anything else, yep, you muted. So I'll just say, we're aiming, Sue and I chatted about it, and we're aiming for we're planning on the next meeting, the May meeting, being hybrid. That's the one where we're going to be having, we're going to be, we'll talk about this later, but in May, we're going to have kind of not a public hearing about, cannabis retail land use amendments, but it's kind of going to be an effort above and beyond to hear from the public. So I think it'd be good to have at least, some of us in person, but also just to have the hybrid set up to accommodate everyone. So look for that and be aware of that for next month. Sarah, do you want to ask for anything be changed around? Because you have to leave by 7 p.m. I know you expressed to me some interest in the bylaw modernization grant RFP. Being a person who reviews that, but I don't think that's.
If there's any way to bump that up to before 7, happy, to hear about that more. But if not, I'm still on board to participate.
Right.
Yeah.
Sue, do you think there's anything that will need to be said for that agenda item, and talked about besides just who's going to be on that?
No, I think
Okay.
I can do it really quickly here, and you can make the decision and be done with it. Or we can, however you want to.
No, well, I think Sarah has interest, and we're not going to have any surprises at 7:15. We're not going to say, hey, actually, this role involves running a marathon. So.
No, what I would say is I hope to do it early next week. I'm on vacation the last week of April, so I'd like to kind of figure it out next week who the consultant will be. So far, we have one proposal.
Okay. Great. I see Gary's hand up about any amendments to the agenda or announcements, Gary.
Oh, I was just wondering if we were approving the minutes now and then move on to the next part of the agenda, or from last.
Yeah. Well, if there's no more announcements or amendments to the agenda, seeing none, let's move on to reviewing last meeting's minutes, March 7th. People can make a motion or suggest some edits, or perhaps Steve can weigh in on comments he received.
Any discussion?
I've only received edit suggestions from Tom so far, to my knowledge, but
okay.
Folks are welcome to send written edit suggestions at any point prior to a meeting. If you have anything pressing that you think would be difficult to capture while we're discussing them here, I'd be happy to receive those.
Okay, well, I'll just go. I guess maybe I got a little picky with the minutes in reviewing them, but I had some suggested changes to reflect what I remember happening in the meeting, at least around things that I said. But I don't know, like, how do we want to do that? Because they weren't just, 1 or 2 word changes. They were like inserting, a couple sentences. Should I go through the minutes and say what they were? I submitted them to Steve before the meeting.
Yeah, I think it's best because we can't make changes just based on one suggestion. So it'd be best to go through them.
Okay. All right. Under the just to be clear for everyone, when I was saying with the traffic signage, the parking lot and garage signage assessment. And I was saying what Dan Tyler of DPW responded to me about the feasibility of putting signs up on the mast arms. He just said that that DPW will just have to review the plans. It's not a matter of, paying for an engineering study to be done or anything. That's something they can do in-house. And then, and then at the end of the minutes, it said that there was, regarding meeting in person or digitally, the minutes say that there was no vote, but there was a consensus that will continue remotely for the indefinitely or for the near future. But I tallied things up and it seemed like 4 people were in favor of, or 3 people were in favor of in person and 1 was kind of split. So it seemed to me that's why, we're going to do next meeting hybrid and start kind of going back somewhat to in person, because there was general support for an in-person component, not just remote like the minutes say. Yeah, that's fine. Those 2 changes. Does that sound good to everyone, I guess?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So should I make the motion?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, I move that we approve the minutes from, we're in April now, March. What date was that on, Tom? March 5th?
March 7th.
March 7th minutes.
And would you like to do it as amended by my comments?
Yeah, and also as amended by Tom's comments.
Okay, is there a second? Prudence seconds. Any further discussion before we vote?
I just wanted to reiterate from what we briefly discussed last time. I don't disapprove of the minutes, but I just I guess it would be good sometimes to I guess I'm looking specifically at the housing action plan source section of the minutes. Great to have lots of detail. I'm all for it. When there's a brief discussion or other priorities that were discussed and so forth, I just don't know that all the details are necessary, but that's certainly, it's not a bad thing to put more details in there. It's just that sometimes we haven't been terribly explicit about some of those details in the discussion. That was my comment from last time, just to carry that over. But I would approve these.
Okay. So all those in favor, raise your hand, please. And okay, Gary, your hand's up for in favor.
I'm in favor.
Okay, that's unanimous. Minutes are approved. Let's move on to our first substantive agenda item. Rolf is here, Rolf Parker of building a, sorry. Hold on just a second.
But okay.
Where did those darn minutes go?
Building.
I can just tell you.
Building a positive community. And he's, and they have a great initiative here to improve community health. And apparently there's some connection to the Planning Commission and the town plan. So let's hear it, Rolf.
All righty. So
Find this in the heart.
So actually, I'm just realizing that I've got this here on my screen, and I don't know how to have it pop up on your screen. I did send the link to Sue, but
I'm not sure I saw that. But Rolf, I will let you share your screen.
Oh, okay.
Let me see. I think to do that, I'm gonna. You should be able to share now, maybe.
Let's
You
see.
try?
Share screen. Okay, there we are. In theory, they were on the wrong page. Okay, there we are. So I'm here without my colleague, Alicia Underwood, tonight. She was able to make it last week, but I'm here this week. So just to first of all, I'm from Building a Positive Community, which is a local nonprofit here in town, which receives funding from the Department of Health. And this is one of their initiatives. So basically 3450, it's not a very catchy name, but basically the idea is that there's 3 behaviors which cause 4 diseases which are responsible for 50% of the premature deaths in Vermont. So that's the cheery subject matter. And that there's a place for planning commissions because what's in the town plan helps zoning, helps the actual writers of zoning ordinances have backup, especially for some particular things, which we'll see. I am now wanting to go back. Okay. So basically the idea is that towns and Brattleboro is already doing a lot of the things that are typically the state wants to encourage. And so this is an example of a sign-up sheet, and you'll see as we go through here that you're already doing most of these things. You know, things like conducting a community bike audits, you know, promoting walking, organizing free and accessible health and fitness community events, installing bike racks, and so on. And they've got these different levels: bronze, silver, and gold. And as I say, you guys are really, and you're doing a lot of the things that are on here. So, and you don't have to do all these things. You just have to do, like for bronze, they've got 5 out of 7, for example. But some of them, and my main work is really focused on tobacco, and they have actually some things related to tobacco. So for example, actually I want to get rid of this because I can't see the whole screen. I'm trying to get to this column, which I've managed to cover up with a bunch of faces. I'm assuming my view is your view.
No, we don't see the faces.
Oh, fantastic. Glad
Yeah,
to hear it.
Yeah.
So under silver here, they've got pass content-free advertising. And basically what that means, content neutral signage rules. I am admitting that I'm a little bit flustered because I cannot actually see my own text. So
Rolf, are you
Yeah.
seeing everybody's faces down the side?
they're going down the side, exactly.
Okay. So at the top of that, you'll see.
Got it.
Like,
I just
hi-
zapped it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So basically, they've got past content neutral advertising restrictions to limit promotion of unhealthy products and especially tobacco. And interestingly enough, Dummerston has done something like this. I'm going to skip down here. This actually, I just dropped in. I just received this information like 5 minutes before the meeting that Vermont's tobacco, cigarette smoking has actually gone up. We're now above the national average. And so that's the first time in decades where we've gone the wrong direction. And basically, these are just some photos from around town. The idea is that tobacco companies, we know from their documents that they see ads at points of sale as being an important tool for retaining people who are on the verge of quitting, because it stimulates basically impulse sales. And they've spent $16 million in an average year on coupons and discounts in Vermont. So that's the why, and one possible how-to. And I know that, let's see here. So basically in Dummerston, what they've said is that no lot can contain more than one sign unless the Development Review Board finds that more than one sign is necessary in the conduct of business. And what that did actually is it just removed all the tobacco advertising from their retailers, their 2 convenience stores, just evaporated. So I'm obviously not asking you as a planning board to, go for this legislation or any other specifically, but that in order for there to be any attempt to tackle content neutral sign regulations, there'd have to be a desire, expressed desire in the plan to somehow come up with a reduction in the total amount of advertising. This advertising here is about 1,000 feet from the high school and the middle school. It's at the Circle K, which is kids walk straight through there, sometimes on lunch break. So at any rate, that's that concept. And also, please stop me at any point if you have questions. I'd much prefer being asked in the middle of anything than otherwise. Back to the sign-on form down at Gold. We have that restrict sale of tobacco near schools, childcare centers, and playgrounds, or limit the total number of tobacco retailers through a town plan or zoning language. And Brattleboro has, I should have the exact number, because I actually went to every single retailer in the Brattleboro area last year. But the general idea is that the more retailers you have, the more chances for someone who's trying to quit to be tempted, especially with all the advertising that typically goes on in the exterior of buildings. And then also all that advertising is none of that money is wasted. I mean, the tobacco companies are spending all that money because it works. So at any rate, that is that portion. You guys, again, just dropping in how much you guys are already doing. You've got, just noticing here, there was one that I especially was aware you guys had been working on. Well, I mean, this is a pretty easy one. The improved visual appeal of public spaces with planting, lighting, benches, artistic bike racks, and wayfinding signs. But jumping back, there are additional options. Alicia helped me pull these out of some of the other 3450 programs, which are also designed for companies. So cigarette butt litters, promotion of smoking cessation in general, and courtesy signs. So for the cigarette butts, there are these butlers that can collect butts, which are actually can be recycled with a company called TerraCycle. And then there's also to reduce secondhand smoke, that these butlers could be set 25 feet away from all doorways of all town properties. And for cessation, inform all employees about the 802 quits options and allow flexible time for all employees for exercise and 802 quit cessation sessions. So, and the real hope, of course, is that that might encourage other employers in the area to do the same. And finally, this is what we call a courtesy sign. These can be placed without an ordinance, and just having these at all town properties. Thanks for keeping this a smoke-free and vape-free zone. You may have seen these at the local bus stops. So I don't know if you have any questions for me, but that is me trying to stay within my 15 minutes. I don't know if I succeeded or not. I was trying to get through that pretty quick.
Yeah, you did, Rolf. Thank you. And we'll have another 15 or so for any questions or discussion. I see Gary's hand up. Why don't you start us off, Gary?
I guess the question is that a lot of the signs are currently up, like when the housing and their buildings, I see them down by the schools. So they're already being implemented, to my understanding, down here in Brattleboro. I'm just trying to see a correlation, but I did see a lot of the stuff that you were talking about looked pretty much like my charts at the hospital with tobacco and all the other stuff. So I'm just trying to get feelers out to see if we're already doing currently a lot of the things that you're doing with like signage.
Yeah, so we actually gave a lot of signs to Carol a lot.
Yes.
And there actually are some places where they're still not up, but this would be for making sure that they're available at all town properties. So, for example, I know that like there's a park on Pine Street that doesn't have a sign. There is a sign at the Elliott Street Park, but it's really tucked away. But I'm very grateful for the places where she did put it up. But in general, the idea would be that it would go up on all. These can be placed also at the Common, for example. There's nothing at the Common.
Oh, okay. And at Pliny Park, is it, Tom? Plinky Park?
Oh,
Plinny
well,
Park.
Pliny Park does have one, certainly, but
Okay.
but the Common itself. So the idea would be to, if we say all, that would be, strike, basically at all properties, just to make sure it's, as widely spread as possible.
Yeah, pretty much like the hospitals have them all set up, BMH all over.
Right.
Well, your general stores, I don't know if Hannaford's Price Chopper has those places.
Oh, well, those are private locations. So I just all town owned property.
Okay. Let's hear from Dan.
Yeah, so just kind of to clarify a bit, are we signing on for the bronze, silver, or gold level? Is that the gist of it?
Well, you could make that as one option in your town plan. I mean, it's not that you guys would be signing up for that, but that as a planning commission, that you could say that this is something that we think should happen, or that or it could be the planning commission language could be we want to reduce the number of retail, I'm just picking something, the number of retailers in town. We think there should be a cap on the retailers, tobacco retailers in town, or we think it should be set at this level. I mean, those are all things that you could decide as a planning commission. But if it's in the plan, then the select board can act on it more actively. And in order for the plan to really be enactable, it would need to really state why this is so important. It would have to have some technical language on basically this is a problem as identified by the CDC. And these things are actually like tobacco retail density is something identified by the CDC as a major problem. So at any rate, Prudence, did you ever hear?
Yes. So I think this is a great program. I was at the health department when it first came out, and but a couple of things. One is, I think the planning commission, it's in our purview to make recommendations to the select board about zoning changes. Certainly,
Right.
if we were going to restrict the number of retailers and so on, it would take a fair amount of discussion here, I think.
Absolutely.
And signage regs, I believe, is within our purview. In terms of the encouraging employees, secession resources for employees, I think that should go to the HR director. I mean, that's not the planning commission. And then I think probably putting the signs up, maybe the town manager, that would go maybe to the town manager to instruct department heads if he agrees.
Certainly, that would be another option. I was just, and maybe that's the best route for Brattleboro. But if it was stated as a general, I guess in my mind, if it was stated as that this would be generally beneficial to have these courtesy signs on all town properties. But I hear you. I could certainly also just talk to the town manager. Maybe that would be an easier way. Oh, Sue.
Yeah, I just want to point out our town plan isn't going to be redone for several years. So, if there are some of these things that you want to act on beforehand, I think,
Oh, yeah.
it to HR, I think waiting around for it to show up in the town plan could result in waiting for a couple of years.
Got a couple questions, but first, Sue, just to follow up with you for my own education, but maybe for all the other commissioners as well. I think we're all us commissioners are much more familiar with the land use regs because we talk about them more and we've made amendments to them in recent time, but we haven't to the town plan, I don't think, since any of us have been commissioners. So when you say that we won't be making changes to it in a few years, is what you mean that the convention is to wait until the deadline, every 8 years, but we could amend it more often than the deadline, correct?
You could. It's a process.
No, I know.
It's a long adoption process, and it's so
that's why it tends to
couple of months. So that's why, it tends, and it's meant to be kind of a visionary document as well. So, it's good for 8 years now. If you want it updated sooner, we're just going to have to be talking to make sure it fits into our schedules as well. But yes, it can be updated sooner.
Sure. I mostly just asked that, so everyone has a, kind of a sense of the context of the planning commission's role. Rolf, is besides the obvious, benefits that you're advocating for with bronze and silver and gold level, is there any other benefits or implications of achieving these levels?
Well, in theory, I mean, besides like just improving people's health outcomes, I mean, is really what it's all about. So I'm not sure if I really.
Is there any sort of reward that the Vermont Health Department grants?
I mean, like
towns,
a financial reward or financial support? Prudence can back me up on this, but my understanding is that not.
Okay.
No, I think you get some certificates you can hang up and stuff, you get noticed on the website.
Right. I think when you go to the site, they actually talk about resources in Barry, in the video about Barry, but I don't believe that's actually the case.
Okay.
I think improved community health would be the thing we'd be going.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just wondering. And my third point is, Sue, do you want to answer that? Or okay, and my third question is actually to you, Sue. I'm wondering, since you've had experience here with reviewing the town plan, from what you heard of the suggested ideas from Rolf, are a fair amount of those relevant to the town plan, and are also some of them relevant to land use regs?
I'd have to spend some more time with it. I mean, you could certainly have some sort of health chapter. We've talked about it even with the cannabis stuff. I'm not a huge fan of using zoning to try to regulate people's behavior, only in the built form way. Making sure that we have sidewalks and bike paths, but, certainly it's up to the planning commission, and when we could explore some of these tools and just make sure that they're, that they're feasible and lawful. I can tell you our department does not want to be regulating advertising on a site. Sign regulation is tough enough. So I'd prefer to work on the walking and the biking aspects and good design of public parks and public spaces. But
Right, like we may not be able to even do buffers, correct? For tobacco, or can we legally?
I think that we can. It's not anything that we've done, but I'm going to have to look into that further. We don't
Right.
have any buffers other than, we have them on floodplains, but those are have been stood up. So I'd have to run it by our town attorney.
Right. Yeah, and I think we all remember the memo that Steve wrote about buffers for cannabis and how that was kind of filled with landmines. But anyway, for cannabis, the state preempted that and made it a requirement. But anyway, that's all I have. But I'll just say, yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm not finishing things, but just
sure.
from my own voice here, thank you, Rolf. This is, I'd say it's definitely an ideal to strive to greater community health with whatever tools we have, within reason. So I'm curious and interested to explore this further and see what we can do. I don't think we're not going to decide anything in these 30 minutes.
Certainly.
But we can try to see, what could be considered for the town plan, what could be considered for land use regs, and then revisit those at future meetings. And if you could share the background material and some of those proposals with Sue, then we can work some of these into future meetings. But I want to put 5 or 10 more minutes to keep hearing from the other commissioners. Gary.
So this is my last and final Jeopardy question. So something like this can be incorporated, I guess, when we start planning on, moving forward, say, for instance, a marketplace down where Harmony Lots is at, and mention these signages and things like that. Is that something we can do, Sue or Tom? Add that and incorporate it with that plan?
I suppose, Gary, but I don't know if we would implement some of these proposals just singularly to a single market, to a single property. I think a lot of these proposals, these suggested measures are kind of town-wide or zone-wide ideas, not just targeted to one area.
Well, they can be.
Okay.
Like you can, density is sometimes measured towards proximity, towards places frequented by minors, for example. So schools, for example.
Right. So if you're in the marketplace, if I do understand, most places prohibit smoking. I guess that's why I was trying to get at, Tom. Just something like that Ralph was saying that could be built in with that somewhere down the road. And like Sue said, you don't have to wait. So if a plan comes up, like down at the Amtrak or something like that, we can incorporate that as well also. But it's kind of late now, right, Sue?
Well, I don't know that the DRB or the planning commission has the authority to do that. I think it would be the select board or town policy on those signs. But certainly in a lot of the parks, there's no smoking signs. So
right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I was just thinking about the Amtrak. I'm assuming they'll have those signs up, but it's kind of late now, I guess, to mention something what Ralph was saying. In certain areas, you're not allowed to smoke on platforms and places like that. So that would be a public area, people getting off and on the trains and all
I
that.
think that will be whether Amtrak decides or not,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
because they're going to own the station.
Oh, got it.
Dan,
Rolf, you mentioned Dummerston. Can you tell us more about what they were involved in?
Well, so specifically, Dummerston restricted the number of signs and the amount of square footage. And so prior to that law, their convenience stores were kind of plastered with discounts and coupon, notifications. And so after their law went through, all those signs disappeared. So from our perspective, but it was content neutral. So that, in other words, it didn't talk about what was on the sign, but just simply the number of signs that were allowed. And the number of signs that are put up for tobacco advertising, sometimes this is 5, 6 or more, so by having that limited, all those ads disappeared.
okay. Well, commissioners, are we interested in, maybe Rolf can forward these proposals, these measures to Sue and Steve, and then over time they can see where they would best fit in either the town plan or the land use regs, and then over time kind of bring some up at future meetings for consideration to possibly act on. Do we have interest in this?
I would entertain that for future
All right.
projects, honestly.
I saw Sarah nodding her head. I'm nodding my head. Prudence, Dan. Okay. So no action, but we're interested. So,
Great.
oh, it's Prudence.
Actually, I thought we should look at them when we're ready to do the town plan.
Right.
Well, sure. Certainly the town plan.
When we're taking on the town plan, not as amendments, but yeah. And I really do think it would be good to talk to the town manager and HR about these other things, just because you'll
Absolutely.
get action quicker or a no,
Yeah.
but you'll get an answer.
Yeah. All righty.
Okay.
I
All right,
shall
we'll be in
send, and
by email.
I shall send you on your way, and have a glorious remainder of your planning session. I'm going to go off to writing group, so I'm glad to have had a chance to talk to you, and I guess that's all.
Thank you, Ralph, for sharing your
Thank you,
time.
Rolf.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the considering an amendment to the DRB's review criteria. Sue or Steve, would you be able to get that document up on screen share? So this is related to the that work of the preferred solar siting subcommittee last year. This was one of the possible recommendations at the end of that document, and so I kind of explored our land use regs in this respect, and the motive here is to try to do some sort of promotion or semi-requirement for having more solar energy in town. Looks like Sue's still looking for the document. Should be right in the drive folder.
I'm sorry,
Anyway.
I'm not feeling well tonight, so I'm a little
okay.
bit
That's all
slow.
right.
I'm just trying to make sure I have the right page.
Oh,
Okay.
you're slugging it too, like me.
Mhm.
I got that cyanitis. Oh,
No, I got the COVID, so.
I was at the ER just yesterday.
So just to give some kind of a range of context, if we're entertaining the option, or the thought that solar energy is is a good thing and we need more of it, then, in an ideal world, or hypothetically at least, we could potentially require it to be on the roofs or on certain properties, that fit certain criteria. Let's just say, a large building, over a certain amount of square feet of roof, that's newly built or with a major renovation. But there's some, argument that maybe we're not legally able to make such a requirement. And also, even if we were, maybe that's too much of an ask right now, for development. So what I'm proposing is just like how the DRB reviews property for like 12 different categories. One of them being certain energy conservation features. So too, could they maybe review and to what extent they require, they could all require solar energy or renewable energy generation. Okay, so anyway, going through the document, this first page is just, for background. It's I think as you all know, our zoning is supposed to, we're not supposed to do things in the land use regs that aren't enabled to towns through statute. So here's some relevant parts. But moving on, pages 2 and 3, I just included them and highlighted them to give some background on the types of review that the DRB does. There's major site plan review and conditional use review. And then so that will, that's the background for the actual table, which is right there. And in that you'll see, I just suggested some language there in the popped out box. And I kind of modeled it after the second sentence or both sentences of the number 11 energy conservation. So kind of like how I alluded to earlier, just like how currently the DRB, when reviewing those types of developments, site plan and conditional use zoning permits, they have the ability to review and require certain energy conservation, energy saving approaches. The energy generation category is pretty limited. It only speaks to not interfering with the renewable energy resources on adjacent properties. But it seems to me like I didn't see anything in statute that would bar this, and it seems to fit the current, precedent and powers the DRB has, just to add in similar wording. And one example could be what I wrote here, which is something, I saw this in Massachusetts. They have this term solar ready zones. We don't have to call it that, but it's, if a new building's being built or majorly renovated, let's say, and it seems, I don't think this would necessarily apply to, single family houses. But just like how the rest of the wording in all these categories for the DRB's review criteria isn't, it's kind of general, right? It doesn't, none of these categories speak to like very specifics with developments. That's what the rest of the land use regs are for. So to be honest, I'm not on the DRB and I haven't followed it closely, so I don't know to what extent they follow these, they use these criteria strictly and to their maximum extent or not. But it seems to me that if a new development is happening or a major renovation of like a large roof that's especially flat or low sloped, that it would be beneficial for renewable energy generation if the DRB can kind of require that the roof is at least built and able to be, like structurally built, and to be able to in the future have solar panels on it. Because a lot of things that I have heard with new developments or major renovations is when someone brings up and asks, oh, did you consider solar on that roof? Is the developers or the people in charge will say, oh, the engineering of the structure, we're renovating it, but the current engineering isn't able to handle, the extra weight of panels. But if the building is built in the first place with that that structural capability, then that saves a lot more costs than a future renovation. So kind of going in circles here, but let me just finish by saying that this requirement here, to the extent that it's a requirement, that's kind of some question in my mind, all these criteria, but this wouldn't so much, require solar on any roof, but it would require that that there's at least a significant zone of the roof that is reserved for solar and is also structurally capable of having solar. So that way, then it's not an impediment to future solar placement on that roof. So yeah, I'd like to hear what people think, especially the folks on the DRB, and see if this is workable or seems to make sense.
Well, I guess that includes me, Tom. I kind of like it. It's doable. And it's just now a matter of, I guess, the final approval of DRB. What do you think?
Oh, it's our final approval. Well, actually, the select boards, anytime we change the land use regs.
Oh, okay. Well, then you have my vote.
Dan.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of make a distinction. I think what you're looking at in this list of is basically it's prevention rather than promotion is maybe one way to look at it. And I think requirements are only put in place when they're preventing a future problem. I get it that there is a potential future problem, big picture, of course, with lacking solar. But at the same time, unless there's a structural reason that's related to something like snow load, or other sort of catastrophic failures, I think the solar ready zones is a great idea, a great concept. I don't know if it's I think it's more promotional than preventive, if that makes sense.
Not entirely, to be honest.
Okay. Well, take, for example, any of the other, or actually, okay, I guess what I was going to say earlier is the sentence that's in there, the proposed development will not interfere with the use of, access to renewable energy sources on adjacent properties. That's about preventing neighbors from having, like, let's say, trees and the larger building next to the small building that will prevent the sun from getting, to the, there are certain line of sight issues. But so you're preventing people from being impacted, some way. But this is, you're looking at issues that are unless there were a fund or a way to incentivize this to happen, I don't know that the DRB can promote things to happen, if you get what I'm saying. It's more like Go ahead.
I get what you're saying, but then I wonder, it seems like the DRB, requires things to happen with all sorts of other categories. I mean, look at the one right below it, energy conservation. I mean, maybe that's not true, and that's, illegally inserted there. I don't know, but it's requiring high efficiency buildings, certain light fixtures. There's all sorts of things. Impermeable pavement and certain landscaping and screening and electric car chargers, and so.
Yeah, and some of it, it's promotional for sure. I get what you're saying. some of it's wishful thinking too, for sure. But
Okay.
I'm not saying that not all of that is not done, but it's some of it is, for lack of a better word, wishful thinking.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting if something's written in this review criteria, but then it has no kind of backing or specificity anywhere else in the actual regs, then I wonder, that doesn't seem to, carry much weight in my mind for the DRB. But, like landscaping to provide windbreaks. I mean, I don't think our land use regs anywhere else talk about windbreaks and what makes a good windbreak or an effective windbreak. But, I thought, and I realized these things when I am suggesting this wording, but it seems like the kind of, a way to get the foot in the door with at least getting, this on developers' minds. It provides a way for the DRB to make a comment and have some influence, but maybe not without, and maybe it doesn't have any actual backing. I don't know. But I want to hear from Sue, unless Dan, you wanted to follow up. Okay. What do you think, Sue?
So we looked at this, we had Brian look at this language, and as staff, we're concerned that it's not flexible enough, and that not all sites are situated for solar, and not all buildings are appropriate either, because the site's shaded by slope or forest, the roof already has mechanicals on it.
Sure.
Or the proposed structure is not going to generate enough to make it, feasible for net metering and, and make it financially workable or profitable. So Brian had suggested language calling for minimizing net energy use or minimizing fossil fuels could offer a checklist of potential options while allowing for varied sites and structures. So it's something, he thought would be better, and something that we could work on, or if that was of interest.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in hearing, more refined options, but I wonder, do those comments, do they transfer over? Are they applicable to, like number 11, where, certainly not all developments can be high efficiency buildings or, have windbreaks or oriented to maximize solar gain?
So that's probably the one criteria that, has the least amount of guidance in it for the, in the land use regulations, like well, except for 2 and 3, but the rest of them kind of have standards associated with it. So I think 11, the way the DRB has worked with it, I mean, it opens up the avenue to say, hey, what are you doing? And the developer will give us some information about, what kind of fixtures they're using or windows or that kind of thing, if they know it. But it's definitely one of the criteria that's broad and doesn't have a lot of definition to it. But I think if you add what is given to number 10, there's no flexibility there. It's like, no, you must design it that way, and that's the way that the DRB will interpret it. And I think Steve has pointed out, and he can speak more to it, but we need housing, and we know the prices of housing is just really high. So a requirement like this is going to add more cost to development, and maybe that's okay, but maybe we need to think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
And figure out what all the trade-offs are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think there's, by adding to the wording, how it already says in my proposed wording, it says energy generating approaches may include, do you think, I mean, do you think it's worthwhile to have kind of just like a kind of loose and flexible and suggested phrase here to at least get people thinking and talking about this, or do you think if we're going to do this at all, it has to be really hemmed out and really specific and defined? Because I mean, it already says may include, so it's not a binding thing. It's
right, but it's also saying it seems to be focusing on solar energy to me. I mean, I think that maybe we need to come up with a standard like we do for the rest of them, and then we'll feel more comfortable with the way that 10 already reads existing, or adding this language. But in my mind, like, this language would maybe be one of the options that you would get in a standard somewhere else, but the review criteria would maybe stay as it is.
Oh.
So I see it it could be something different looking.
Okay. Gary, what do you think?
So basically, I guess I'm getting an understanding what Sue's saying. So this is basically like a standalone, rather than having this adaptation included with renewable energy. So it would now, we were promoting, and it was in the purview of also talking about solar energy and having that in the new housing. I don't know if that was part of the master plan that we were doing, and having that incorporated with the DRB as a thought. But I see what Sue's saying, because once you put it in there with the DRB, and it says, I guess it becomes a law. Is that what it's driving towards, Sue? Once it goes before the DRB? So anybody that builds housing, right? So anybody building, not existing, but building housing, this would be a criteria that they have to do as part of that. Because I was just trying to figure out what's coming down the pipeline too. What did you see anything, Tom, and anything with the state mentioning this in any sense here, in the same way you put this in text?
Solar on roofs, I haven't noticed, but I haven't looked closely at the at the public building code for Vermont. I don't know if that has anything in there.
Okay, so I was going to ask Steve Hayes. He might have a little insight.
I think this might be in the stretch code.
I'm certainly not a building code expert. Would probably behoove me to become one, although we don't have a local building code, so maybe not. But certainly there are some pieces of the IBC and IRC that are frequently critiqued as unnecessary cost adds, which feels like a pretty shameless segue into what I actually wanted to bring up. But I wanted to revisit what Sue mentioned, which is that I would, as strongly as possible, advise against anything that adds cost to desirable development. I am not necessarily opposed to things that either allow for less desirable development to actually feel its true cost, and not, especially development that creates externalities. Or even maybe the idea of adding different costs to development that we'd rather not see, although that is a whole can of worms. But especially when there is development that we want to see, and not just want to see, but need, urgently need, as defined in our recent planning publications, particularly housing, anything that is adding a cost to something that we've been able to establish is already an economy that's warped out of proportion and seemingly can't provide housing at market rate at the moment, just full stop. It would feel like digging ourselves into a hole to add an additional cost, which, I'm not opposed to the idea of having a certain regulatory process that somehow is able to credit or benefit with some sort of carrot, so to speak, developments that choose to do this. But I think it's, especially even if we're not requiring, which I think it would be a humongous mistake to require that PVs go on housing, especially if it was only the higher density end of housing, because that would be, I think, regressive in effect, as we tend to exempt the single and duplex developments from a lot of these kind of requirements. I think even just requiring large scale housing to engineer every project as if it were intended for solar is going to be adding substantial cost, potentially even more than we can conceive here, to every multifamily housing project. I think that would be a significant problem. And it is, and I'm just going to put in there, I would love to have a conversation at some point about whether we're actually benefiting from adding, you mentioned electric vehicle chargers as another one of the things that's a cost add that's being required for the goal of sustainability. I think that and just parking in general being required would be a fantastic values conversation to have with the Planning Commission, but that's my soapbox, so I'll get off it.
Okay. Yeah, let's respond to that quickly and just say, because I don't want to take up too much time, 7 minutes left. But I saw Gary's hand too. Yeah, I mean, certainly I acknowledge, the warped costs, as you say, Steve, and, of development right now, and, especially housing development, and we're in a housing crisis and we need more. So I certainly, in writing this, I didn't make a more bold proposal, which would have been just outright requiring solar, right, on certain developments. So I wrote this in the interest of furthering solar development, but not doing such a heavy lift. So, and it seems to me that this is worth considering, because still, even in this time of high development costs but needing more housing development, because when a new development, building goes in, especially, big ones, they take up quite a footprint, and they're there for decades, centuries. And it would just be a shame when we know that we need to go in the renewable energy generation, and maybe we don't want it on farms and fields and forests. It would be a shame to not have these parking lots and these buildings that are newly built and renovated, not have them just, consider one more little design attribute, which is, making sure the roof can handle a little bit more pounds per square foot, and that they move the HVAC systems over into one area so there's enough space for the possibility of future solar. So, I realize the context we're in now, but I just want to, add that, because this seems still like a wise consideration, even during our, time of high development costs. So, I guess I'd just like to hear if commissioners are interested in this still living somehow, in being reworded, or, being gentled somehow, or what do people think? Just throw it out in the interest of not adding any single burden to any more burdens to housing and development, or what do folks think? Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, well, my thought, and this is my thought, that basically when I watched on the news how Biden said he wanted to get into this and billions of dollars invested in this, and how this is being promoted and pitched and everything. And they mentioned, because mentioning that housing was very important in this particular. I mean, I needed to probably get some more information and give it more teeth, because I probably could have researched it even better, that this is a priority, because this is where it's leading towards, and the monies are going to be there. And I'm just leaning towards more the adoption of that in there, because when that point comes and that time comes and that floodgate opens up, the funds are going to be there. The resources may not be now, you're saying, but I have this feeling from what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, And when I'm reading that, yeah, it's going to happen. And I think I don't want to be left, you know, basically with an empty pot. You know what I mean? And kind of said, wish I could have, should have, I would have, but we didn't. So I don't want to look at that man in the mirror and just feel, wow, this is something we could have done. At least it's there because it's coming. Because he did say he wants billions of dollars into this and electric cars. So I think the longer this putting off and not having that in there, because then you're giving the DRB, hey, this is important. We got to remember this. Because if this is not put in there, I just feel it's going to be looked over.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you want to respond?
Oh, sure. Well, I wanted to respond to, I think that I wasn't aware that you were intending on the parking lot aspect of it too. I might have.
Yeah, well, that's not written in there, but yeah, the parking lot thing isn't written in there. But I don't think we should look at this as my final and absolute, wording, and I don't think we should look at this as my final wording that I would, sign my life, that I bet my life on. It's just kind of a draft, but it's meant to get more solar over development in general.
Sure. Yeah. The super brief kernel I was going to put in there is that in the event that we had a change of our regulations that require parking, if we were to add a requirement that if you wanted to propose without being required to provide off-street private parking, that maybe that would be the kind of added cost that might balance out for us the values of something that is sustainable being added to something that is a land use that's not sustainable. But in the event that we were, both requiring parking to be added from most development outside the downtown, as well as requiring PV solar on it, I think that would be a very large cost add. And per Gary's comment, I just think it's probably not wise for us to put language in our regulations in the anticipation of potential federal monies. In the meantime, while that doesn't yet happen, and even if in the event that there is not federal money for that, we will be adding cost to all of our potential housing. And I would very, very strongly stress against that, considering the importance of dire unaffordability that our recent housing study has established.
I just want to chime in quickly and say that this, and Prudence will be next, that this could be modified to not apply to housing. For example, it could be just large buildings. This is just a draft here, but Prudence. Oh, you're muted, Prudence.
Sorry. What about the idea, Tom, of language, similar to what you've proposed, not be in the review criteria, but be in, I'm not sure what we were saying the document would be, or what Sue or Steve was saying the document would be, but wasn't there a comment that language might be appropriate in more background supporting document? I don't know if it's land use regs or what it is. Sorry.
Well,
Yeah,
well, this
I was suggesting that there actual be actual standards in the land use regulations. So most of these criteria are being evaluated based on how they meet the standards in another section of it. So we could try to come up with some standards or some flexible language that way.
Doran?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if there was any way of, I don't know how you would be able to change like anything that like would make it by us like suggesting that it'd be really great if you did this, and then by people like taking it on, being able to receive any type of, I don't know, like a yes towards additional funds. Like, yeah, I agree that the idea that anything that can make housing less expensive is really important. We just need housing right now. But it's like, if we could, like, if by someone putting solar panels on their roof, they got some sort of credits, or they got some sort of discount on, like, I don't know. I don't know how you would word it or change it to make it sort of like as a suggestion. And if you take that suggestion, you get some type of assistance in building it, or a discounted cost. I'm sorry, that's not very clear, but I guess that's the way I kind of imagine the easiest way to go forward, is that it's a suggestion that would have something with it that would lend towards lowering cost.
Okay. Gary, what do you think?
Well, I totally understand what Steve said. I totally understand what doing some type of incentivization. Wow, I was humbling too much. Some incentive, which I believe is offered. I don't have too much information, which there are incentives for a lot of things going in that direction for either solar or for electric. It's just, and I hear what Steve's saying. It's just a matter of waiting. I mean, it's definitely a wish list right now. It's like, until we see that check in the hand, we really can't go in the direction. But with this, I understand what Brutus is saying. That could be an addition to that somewhere, a recommendation perhaps for future when that time comes. It's just one of my happy thoughts that could, because I just got a feeling, because sooner or later that's going to happen. It's just a matter of when we're going to be moving. Hopefully soon would be nice to get this going. But the reality is that, I guess they're trying to factor in and figure out the cost of materials and all that, and having the right contractors who are experienced and knowledgeable in this, and also be able to maintain it. So I like to entertain something like have it amended on some other form, Tom, if that's possible, to present to the DRB.
Well, first of all, I mean, it'll be good to hear from DRB members, but we don't have to present anything to the DRB, right? We write these rules, and then they're the ones who implement and interpret them. But we're getting up against the time limit here, or we're already past it. And Steve and Sue already have their hands up, but I wonder if they'll also chime in, because it seems to me that this wording that we have here, that I put here it certainly isn't going to be some final wording, and we're not going to vote on this right now. I wonder if it seems to me like, it seems like what I'm hearing is other commissioners aren't against the idea of some sort of promotion of renewable energy. I think what I'm hearing is most of you or all of you like that idea, but this wording, certainly we're hearing from staff isn't great. So I wonder if we can put homework on staff one more time, like, continually to create something that's kind of more palatable, that promotes solar, and either put it in the land use regs or anyway. What do you think, Steve and Sue?
So very briefly, based on what Doran said, I just wanted to respond. Something to consider if we're gonna continue discussing how to maybe best craft a regulatory language that actually accomplishes the values that folks share without any kind of unintended negative effect. When it comes to the adding incentives to do something, I think it's worth considering if there's a state or a federal incentives pot of money that drives that, then I think the compliance and the regulation will be out of our hands. We can try our best to comply with things that give us free money to do sustainable things, and that would be good. But if we were to do an incentive here that's local, we would need to be thinking about how is that being funded. because another kind of incentive structure that's sometimes used is to offer an exemption from another regulatory piece, which I think, as we found recently, or at least last summer, that is, things like density bonuses might seem like a good idea to generate the kind of characteristics that you want to see, but it tends to be that if you're allowing for someone to do something that you want because they are doing something else for you, it's better to just allow them to do the thing you want in the first place. I'm probably not being concise enough here, but things of that sort of incentive structure tends to be counterintuitive. And I think there's also a risk of us making this, I guess, sort of an unfunded mandate or aspirational language. So I think it's definitely worth considering for a longer time. How do we want to make our value that it seems like I haven't heard anyone push back on the idea that renewable energy is something that's worth promoting. But it also seems like there's a pretty universal among the board and the staff that costs of housing is a serious problem. So we should try to make sure that those two values both continue to be provided for through what we're doing.
Yeah, Sue.
I would just add that we'd be happy to take another crack at this language. It won't be for May, I could tell you that much. I'd also like to kind of understand the state's climate action plan and see if any of this fits into that and maybe what they're thinking of with building code type things. So yeah, we'd definitely be happy to look at it. And the only other thing I want to caution again is, I've been keeping an eye on the infrastructure job acts and the other funding. I mean, they're mostly going to be grant programs, and who's going to be eligible, I don't know. I don't know if private developers are going to be, or if it's going to be nonprofits and municipalities. So there's a lot of federal money out there. It's not necessarily going to be accessible to everybody.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think we have to, there's no need to vote on giving staff homework. And I'm glad to hear that, Sue, that you and Steve are welcome looking into that more. Feel free to, reach out to me more to kind of bat the idea back and forth. And I think, like Sue said, like Steve said, I didn't hear any commissioners push back against the idea of promoting solar in some way, and which our land use regs don't. And I think we heard some in support of that. So let's just leave it there and hopefully revisit a better version in the future, at a future meeting. Okay. All right. Let's move on to appointing commissioners to review the RFP for the Bylaw Modernization Grant. Sue, do you want to excuse you? Sorry, Ariel.
That was a cough.
I'll give a little background.
Sure. So the Bylaw Modernization Grant is our grant to make zoning amendments to the land use regulations to promote more housing. And so we've had the RFP was put out about a month ago. Proposals are due on Friday. And so we're just looking for a team of people to review the proposals with us. As I mentioned earlier, we've had one proposal received. So, there may be a couple more. Basically, several of you have reviewed proposals with us before, but basically we have a set of criteria that you'll look at, review the proposal, kind of assign numbers to it, and then we just get together to talk about it. We do interviews with firms if we need to. And so I'm looking for just, 2 or 3 people who maybe have some time next week to get together on Zoom and, discuss what we found and see if we can't figure out a consultant to hire.
Is it sort of like a rubrics, like you give them numbers?
It's like what we just did with the bike walk.
Okay.
Yeah. So I ran this idea, or sorry, I ran this request or this plan by Sarah last meeting, or before last, when this April meeting was supposed to be last week, and she expressed interest in being on this this RFP reviewing subcommittee, whatever it is. So I think it's safe to say, and she renewed her interest in that, as you all heard earlier. I was hoping Kate would have interest or have time, as she's so involved in housing, but I think she's really crammed these days. Was hoping to get people who, spread it out. So people who aren't on the other, who weren't involved with the bike walk plan selection committee. And Doran, I know you're really, really adamant about housing. So maybe this interests you if you have time. And then that could be 2, or if we want 3, or if Doran's not doesn't have time for that, then I could be the second person.
How many people are you looking for on this time?
Or Gary, Prudence, and Dan, if they want to do it a second time, having just done it or in the process of doing it for bike walk. But so we've got Sarah, that's for sure. Doran, do you want to say one way or the other before we?
Sorry, just reiterate what what you were asking there. Sorry.
Oh, sure. So there's going to be, so far there's only one consultant who's applied for the housing zoning grant that we got, the project. But hopefully there will be more, and then we'll have a selection committee that will, use this point-based system.
Oh,
right?
cool.
Right, that was in the RFP that staff made. Use, they'll review the projects and presentation of the consultants, and then use that that rubric, that point weighted criteria to select which one will get awarded the grant money. Or sorry, the funds that Brattleboro got from the grant. So yeah, I've been involved. We did that with the downtown design plan, and I guess we did with the housing action plan too. Oh no, that was kind of a different group. But yeah, Doran, are you interested in having a role?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested in kind of reviewing those groups. Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
Well, Tom, I think it's my civic duty to step up and do my job. And I'm going to also volunteer my services actively to get involved.
Well, Gary, I think I beat you to it, if you'll recall a few minutes ago. I was saying Sarah and Doran, but not Kate, and then I would jump in, but if we can do more than 3, if we want to do 4 reviewers or 5 reviewers, it seems it's getting a bit excessive, but is that all right, Sue?
It's okay, as long as we can all find time to meet. I'm not, we've got the one. I don't expect to get a ton. We don't usually, when we go out for land use regulations, there's not a lot of firms that specialize in that. So, it's fine. We need to be able to find time to discuss, or at least have you email your thoughts on the review.
I could be an alternate. I mean, if someone else can't make it, life happens, situations happen. So I could be on standby if needed.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Gary. I think that helps keep it simple. So Sarah, Doran, and I, but I saw Dan's maybe wanted to comment.
Yeah, Sue pretty much addressed my question, which is what's the likelihood of getting more applicants? And
right.
And in the case you don't, do you put it out again, or can you have a failed search?
You can have a failed search. I mean, if we have one, I would say we review that one, and if we find that one to be acceptable, then we would go with that one. But no, we could put it out again if we wanted to. We could reject any and all.
Yeah.
I guess how many do you have right now currently that you're interviewing? That's it?
One.
Oh, so yeah, so you don't need that many. Yeah.
in doing so, do you, I mean, since you could really have a, let's just say a national scope on this, would you repost it in a wider venue, or redo the same thing you did before?
I could. What I would say is that consultants don't get paid well enough in Vermont. So we don't attract the big New York City or Boston firms. So it's not really worth paying to go out wider. With this one, I put it on the Vermont Planners Association. I think I put it on NECAPA, which is the Northern New England APA. And then I directly emailed it to consultants on the state's list. So, you know, they're not all Vermont firms. Some of them are New England, but yeah. I mean, in the past, when we've gone out for land use regs, we've had 2 firms send in proposals. So.
Okay, great. So we got that figured out. Sarah, Dorn, and myself.
And Gary is an alternate.
Gary is an alternate. Yep. Okay, written down right here, Gary. And so hopefully we get more than one applicant, but even if we don't, hopefully this one is going to do a good job. Let's move on to the last item. Discussing cannabis and the implementation timeline that's you know, that the state has developed, and our plan to have you know, a planning commission hosted public forum next month to really try to hear from the public before we kind of start thinking about our final thoughts and actions with any changes to the land use regs regarding cannabis. Staff wrote a couple memos here. I put in, you know, something from the Cannabis Control Board into the background folder as well. But why don't Sue and or Steve start us off?
All right, hold on a second. I have a child rescuing a dog, and they'll be out in a minute. And I'll take the mask off. I wanted to start, there was a question a couple of months ago that Dan had about what is the timeline for licensing. And so you'll see here that we're actually kind of in it right now. So April 1st is where applicants could apply for integrated licenses, small cultivators, and testing labs. And those will begin to be issued in May. And then, so the different types of licenses are starting to roll out. Right now, any applicants can do a pre-qualification approval so that, you know, they can figure out whether or not what their likelihood of getting a license is. And so, you know, that's also going on right now. So it's all kind of happening, seems kind of fast, but it's not. It hasn't been fast. It's just that the Cannabis Control Board took a while to kind of get up and running. So that is the timeline. And we get lots of calls in our office about, you know, what do they need to do? They're looking at a certain property, want to know is, you know, what they need to do for local permitting. So we're at a point where if somebody came in, and actually there is one next week for cultivation on the BAPC campus. So if somebody wants to submit for a zoning permit, we have to go under our existing land use regulations. We can't hold it up and say, no, we don't have cannabis specific zoning. So in the case of that one, it's a planned unit development that's agricultural focused. They want to do an indoor grow facility. And so it's going before the DRB next week. Similarly, if a retailer came in and said, I want to open up a shop on Putney Road, we will look and make sure it's not within the buffer area and say, okay, retail, that's an allowed use. So that would be an acceptable site. You have to go before the DRB for site plan approval. So we are to the point where we as a planning commission need to make some decisions if you want to have any cannabis specific zoning regulations. Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah. Wait, you were just asking a question, right? To us in general?
Well, no, I wasn't really asking a question. I was saying we're at the point where we need to decide. And so one of the things that we had committed to back, I guess it was last winter, what year was that? 2021. In early 2021, the Planning Commission had said that they would do some outreach and kind of listen to what the public wanted. So what we're proposing is at the May meeting that we make a presentation that kind of explains our existing zoning and how these uses fit into our existing uses. You know, where they would be allowed. If you wanted to open up a store, where do our zoning regs say it could be allowed? And then just get feedback from the public, kind of educate what we can do with the zoning, but then just get feedback on our existing scheme. Because it seemed like from previous conversations, there didn't seem like we were going down a path where we wanted to have cannabis specific zoning, but I could be wrong. So the idea is to just kind of have a public presentation, allow people to come and talk about it, so that the Planning Commission has some information to then, you know, think about how you want to proceed.
Okay, Prudence?
I should have probably looked back at notes from the previous meetings, but I thought there was some concern. I remember Steve talking about a negative thing that could happen if we didn't have any, you know, anything in our regs. And I agree that, I mean, I think we were educated, and I understand now that, you know, having a lot of cannabis specific regs probably doesn't make sense, but, and I can't remember what that was specifically, but Steve, do you remember?
I'm thinking it was, there was one court case in Massachusetts, which, you know, doesn't obviously make precedent for us, but it seems like a potentially something that would happen, or at the time, at least, it seemed like something that could potentially happen was that a indoor grow facility in I think it was Charlton, Mass, was proposed as a type of like farm structure. And it seems sort of like it was misrepresented in the hearing, which I don't know why there hasn't been maybe a suit on that, and maybe there is actually. But it made it clear that because the town of Charlton had not elected to make any changes to their existing zoning regarding cannabis, that they couldn't retroactively decide to be additionally restrictive on this use, but it seemed like it had more to do with their regulations not being very tight, because they didn't want to have industrial size electrically intense warehouses essentially in a rural farming area, but again, it would appear that they were not actually requiring that if they were allowing it. Anyways, it seems like it probably had more to do with Charlton than it did with us, but we might want to consider whether adding definitions to specifically say this use includes cannabis, more legally tight than that, or this use does not include cannabis, so to speak, so that we don't have any ambiguity. And I do think it's worth mentioning there are a bunch of other towns in Massachusetts that didn't change a thing, like Orange, and they have a dispensary and have not had a nightmare scenario. So I don't want to alarm everybody. I think it'll probably be fine either way, but we could definitely consider that.
Okay. I'll go next. Yeah, I think this whole time I agree, and up until now, that I'm in favor of just, you know, approaching the cannabis retail and cultivation and other uses with our current land use regs, except that, remember, Steve, when those tables that you created that showed, cultivator, retailer, et cetera, and all the different types of uses like greenhouse or light manufacturing, and the cultivation table wasn't associated with any of those at one meeting because we think of it as agriculture, but it's not able to be agriculture by state law. So then it seemed like at the next meeting, your table was revised to have pretty much all the uses for, what was it, cannabis manufacturing. All those got rolled over, duplicated for the cannabis cultivation. And then also greenhouse got added. But it seems to me there should also be another category, which is just, not a category, but what's it called? Just an actual type of development or an actual, principal structure or use, which is, cannabis cultivation outside, outside cannabis cultivation. So although staff, both of you and Brian, I think are going to, receive applicants and zoning permits with this knowledge, we have the land use regs for full accountability and, education of the public. So I think to remove that ambiguity, we need to really spell out and define what cannabis, how our land use regs treat cannabis cultivation and which buildings and uses are applicable to it. So that way, then when the public is reviewing the land use regs, if they do that instead of just calling you guys, but they can see where and how they can cultivate cannabis. The other thing I want to ask, I think this is a question for Sue or Steve, is that in that Cannabis Control Board's guidance for municipalities document I put on there in the drive folder, it says that cannabis businesses cannot be regulated any more than other businesses. So does that mean, commissioners, you should be aware that there's a special use standards chapter in our land use regs for things like inns and adult use, or adult entertainment, and there's some other, special types of businesses or developments that have their own special standards. Does that mean that cannabis businesses cannot have any special regs?
No, they could have special regs like that.
Oh. So then what does that mean, that you can't regulate cannabis any more than other businesses?
Well, so we do regulate other businesses in that way so we can apply it there, as long as it's, something that we can do through zoning. Was that in the zoning part, or was that in just kind of general municipal guidance?
It's definitely in their zoning primer. I forget what the title of it is, but that was one of the main changes that happened when although they did promise us that they would publish a new one this week.
Yeah, they're supposed to have an update to that this week. I'm trying to think of an example that, would be going above and beyond. Maybe saying, I don't know. My brain's a little foggy. I don't want to try to.
Is it
could have special standards? Go ahead, Steve.
Seeing as we have adult use as a standard, which I know we've had the conversation about how Supreme Court decisions make that very clear, at least how the precedent is for the fact that you can discriminate against that business within a certain parameter. At the moment, the fact that we have those on the books and it specifies different standards for where you can and can't be, and you can only be in this one zone, and you are always inherently, as a nature of your use, considered conditional no matter what. We have all those things for the adult entertainment special use standard in, I think it's 305. So I guess if we were going to take that interpretation, which we should run by Bob, it would need to be as restrictive as that or less, which, you know, I would humbly suggest less. But in response to what Tom said very quickly, because I know Doran's had his hand up for forever, if we make sure that our cultivation, our outdoor cultivation use is tight enough so that it doesn't violate state statute, as well as is clearly not going to fall under agriculture insofar as it's a, you know, very specific legal thing in Vermont, I think it would be preferable, at least for my standard, theoretically, and I think that, speaking for the department here, to treat that identically with cannabis and non-cannabis. I can't think of another non-agriculture. Well, yeah, I guess if it's not commercial, there are probably other things that you can grow that are not agriculture per the state's definition, for, you know, tax and preemption reasons. If we were to make sure that that is tight enough so that it treats all of those things the same, but also is affected by our Chapter 320 nuisance standards, performance standards, et cetera, I don't see any reason to specify cannabis and then have to come up with a lot of regulations specific to that and run the risk of being sued. You know, I don't see any particular specific danger that would make that worth doing. But certainly that's open to talking about. I do think it's also worth watching the bill that could potentially make cannabis cultivation preempted as agriculture, which I would personally really hate to see happen, but I don't know how likely that, I think it may have passed one house, but that might be incorrect. But at that point, I don't think we could do anything about where outdoor cultivation could happen. Where I think you are going potentially is adding definitions to miscellaneous manufacturing and other uses of that sort so that folks are sure that they can do indoor cannabis in those places. And I don't see any obvious problems with doing that. I think that would be perfectly fine if we run it by the town attorney and make sure that that doesn't change. We base a lot of our definitions on the LCBO codes. So if we change the language of those from what's just pulled verbatim, that might be cause a problem that we haven't foreseen. So I think staff should just have some, should take a little more time in thinking about what that might do. But I think that that would be a reasonable thing to consider doing in the cannabis regs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Doran.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like when it comes to like the rules around cannabis, I trust in kind of the state statutes feel like the best, and not putting any more any more like hampers on legalization and rules around pot, mainly just because we live in a state of an extreme accessibility. I know dozens of people that have it grow in their backyards. It's very common here. And I think that the state has a very good sense of this, and that they're going to just generally lay down relatively good law. And I just don't think we want to get even more restricted on it. That would just then kind of encourage or discourage kind of the legal ways of it being sold via tourism and the like. So that's just my own personal opinion on the matter.
Sue.
So with the agriculture, we spoke with Brian in the office and kind of looked through the land use regs at one point. So at this point, basically, There's the state defined agriculture, which we have some special exemptions for under chapter 112 or section 112 of our land use regulations. But then when you look at the broad definition of agriculture in the back, let me just share my screen. I brought that up. You'll see it here. Agriculture and forestry, establishments that grow crops, raise animals, harvest timber, or harvest plants or animals from their natural habitats. See section 112. 112 gives the exemptions, but I think moving forward, at least for now, we feel that if somebody comes with a cannabis application and outdoor grow, it falls under agriculture. Not, you know, there's other things happening at the state, but we permit agriculture and forestry in every zoning district. Now, whether or not it should be permitted in every zoning district, maybe it should be conditional use. You know, I think that is the one area to look. But at least for now, if we're getting applications, we're saying, well, it's agriculture. It's not exempt from land use regulations because it doesn't meet the state's definition, but it is agriculture. So that's kind of how we're proceeding right now and how I would explain it at the May meeting.
Oh, I see. So indoor agriculture would fall under that for our purposes?
Indoor, I think we're looking at it more as kind of a manufacturing
Okay, so
kind of use or light industry.
Right, okay,
The table that Steve put together.
right, okay. Good. Yeah, so for the public hearing next, or public forum next month, I personally think it would be really helpful, you know, for any public that shows up to see some of those sorts of all-encompassing like tables that you had, Steve. So that way, you know, ideally everyone, you know, does their homework and reviews it in advance so they get their questions answered. But, you know, I imagine people will say like, oh, it's going to be all over town, or I think it can only be in downtown or this, but then, you know, we can just show them with tables are good. Obviously, you know, highlighted maps, you know,
Yeah.
A map of the whole town is even better. You know, and something showing the buffers. Obviously, that's nothing that we can change or have control of, but it would answer the public's questions, you know, really quickly and visually, instead of, you know, lines and lines of you know, regs or code or statute. I think visuals and tables are very helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely the intent, to put up some maps, do a PowerPoint. There'll be some maps on there. Yeah, make it visual.
Okay,
I'd be
great.
happy to revisit that table and make sure that I actually still think it's, or, you know, that it's actually accurate to our current understandings. I think that was our first crack at it. So I'm sure we understand the goings on much better than that now.
Yeah, and then you'd have to add the agriculture and forestry, you know, part for
Mhm.
outdoor cannabis growing. Okay.
Is there I'm curious, is there anybody, you know, obviously BAPC, there's probably others that we'll think of to kind of give a more direct invite, but is there anyone that you are thinking of we should make sure that we reach out personally to? I mean, we'll do more than we do for the normal posting of agendas, do a press release and get it on Front Porch Forum and do something for Brattleboro and whatnot. But are there any groups that you would specifically like us to reach out to?
I guess our buddy out there in West P, right?
Yeah. Scott Sparks.
Yeah.
Of the business. Dan, what do you think? I know your hand was up before Sue's question as
Yeah.
well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Dan.
That's all right.
All right, no, that's important. I just wanted to make an agricultural comparison, and I don't know the answer to this, so that's why I'm asking. For animals, I'm assuming that there are requirements for fencing, outdoor use of, or, you know, penning of animals, that kind of thing. Is there similar requirement, or is there, you know, any potential need for, you know, in the case of corn, for example, you don't need to fence off corn, but just to make a comparison, is there a requirement for animals to be fenced?
So we have a special use standard for keeping animals in a non-agricultural way. I think that might be section 306, if I'm not mistaken. But I can't off the top of my head tell you what we add in there, but it certainly regulates where and how you can keep animals for a non-agricultural, as the state defines it, at least purpose. There may be state level requirements for security and other site improvements that we are preempted on. And I'm virtually certain that they're doing that with retail establishments. So that might be taken care of as well. But I think that we would need to be putting that in this. If we thought that was a need to do at the local level, we would need to be creating a special use standard for that purpose, if I'm not mistaken.
That makes sense.
Oh, Sue, are you going to answer Dan's question?
Well, I would just say under the state rules, there is some sort of security features. I'm not sure it's fencing everywhere. It depends on how big the crop is, but visibility from the road, I think there's fencing is one of the options. Lighting maybe, but not, it's more security lighting, not on all the time, kind of.
Yeah, that's that reminded me of the last time that they were talking about that. They had included you don't have to have a fence in certain outdoor cultivation if it is set back far enough from the property line so that a reasonable person, which I think we said a couple months ago is apparently a legally precise term, but that's hard for me to believe. A legally reasonable person cannot tell the difference between cannabis and something else. They've apparently established that distance, and if that's how far it is, then you don't have to fence it. At least that's the last time I heard of those regs for the state, at least. So if we feel like there's some reason to think that local regs should be more restrictive than that, we could come up with a standard or think about introducing standards.
So if there is a buffer, sorry, Tom, just one more. So if there's a buffer or a fence required, then the lot that is potential for use in this category needs to be able to accommodate that. Like if, it can't be a 1/4 acre lot or something like that, because it would have too much of a, you could rule out certain properties by default, whatever that buffer is. You think
that may be the case in terms of the state's regulations. I think you could, if I'm understanding them correctly, and it's been a minute, so I should revisit this for you guys. I think that the fencing helps to bring crops further up to the property line, but the last time that I looked, the setback was pretty substantial. Something I want to say 120 feet potentially. So that it's out of our hands, so it is what it is, but that really seems contrary to their, well, many of the state's planning goals, and especially the equity function of what they're doing here. But indoor grow might be a better choice for folks when it comes to if that reduces site capacity. Maybe that's the calculation folks are doing.
To answer Sue's question about other people to directly reach out to, perhaps the agricultural community. I know this isn't a state-defined agriculture, but seeing as there are folks that grow things, maybe they'll think that they'll be able to take a good, profitable crack at growing this new crop that's legal. So I don't know, besides the ag committee of the town, I don't know what organizations and social groups there are, but that's a thought. Got any ideas, Gary?
Well, I was just thinking about what Steve said, that people can't differentiate the difference between a doobie brother or marijuana or ragweed. I think the populace pretty much knows, especially in Vermont, to differentiate what ragweed is and what regular weed is. But as far as being around schools and other institutions in certain rural areas, I think there might be some signage, Tom, maybe. Is that something that could be put up? Hey, they're growing something here, kids. Stay away. Don't touch. Is it because I mean these type of things have to be, but just like if you were doing vaping and all that, or smoke or cigarettes, I mean, it's got to be a way to put up signage.
Gary, don't you remember, if you're told not to do something, then you're going to want to do it?
Yeah, 70s was a good time. I'm just saying.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know that that's anything that the state is entertaining. I'm not sure that that's, I think from the state's perspective, they would like it to be as nondescript as possible.
Oh, okay, good.
They do have signage, the kind of images and that kind of, they have restrictions on that, but I'm not sure that they have any preventative signage required.
Right, especially like farmlands would have to, show that if they're living out in the farm, there's kids out there and all that, going back and forth to school, whatever have you, do not enter, whatever, things like that. I guess preventative safety measures, because that's a big issue that we spoke about. I think it was this time when we went out there to West B, when we were checking his safety issues out there.
Gary,
Because he's around that.
To answer that, Gary, I'd like to divert and see if there's anything else to be said about the public forum we have planned next month for this. Any questions or any further people to contact?
Can we email you?
Sue, so was I correct that you think that hybrid is the best way? Are we going to try to ask visitors to come in person, or we're just trying to open it up so people can come whichever way they want?
I was thinking we'd open it up so people could come whichever way they wanted.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought we talked about.
I mean, I think having these virtual meetings still makes a heck of a lot of sense, especially as I sit here with COVID and you're all in your homes and I'm in mine where everybody's safe.
Yeah.
So.
You think we'll do the select board meeting room I remember before COVID, the library was kind of the most inviting space, that community room, but.
I like the select board meeting room because the planning commissioners can spread out at the dais. So, I mean, I was thinking it would be there. Plus we're set up with the big TV and, are able to figure out how to make that room work.
Okay. I figure I'd bring those things up so any commissioners could weigh in. Yeah, Gary.
This is my last Jeopardy. I was just thinking, would a consideration, I guess, law enforcement come to that meeting too, just to give perhaps maybe their, in case anybody has questions about that in that aspect?
I wanted to keep it limited to zoning.
Okay.
So I wasn't thinking of inviting other people to come and speak.
Gotcha.
Yep, Steve, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I was thinking, since we are though intending to invite BAPC, who we know will have a anti-cannabis with nuance position to come, which is fine and appropriate. I would assume that probably inviting our active applicants for cannabis licenses might be a conflict of interest, but inviting other business groups or advocacy groups or legal aid groups who might have a publicly established pro-cannabis advocacy bent could be a useful thing to do. I know there's NORML or something. I don't know what that stands for, but they do legal advocacy for cannabis policy. And I would assume that they have a state chapter. There may well be other, I guess, sort of pro or neutral to cannabis groups who might have a different perspective to offer as well. So I think if we're, sending out targeted invites to folks to comment on policy. That might be worth doing a quick survey of what the local advocacy community is.
Like Cassandra Holloway, I was wondering if you would be a turning point, places like that.
Yeah. We'll let them know.
Sounds good. Dan, you want to wrap us up?
Well, just one last thing about the presentation. The bullet point under the presentation, Will, the fifth one down, address how nuisances are handled in the existing land use regulation. Are you going to give scenarios, or what would be the preferred way to present that? Just as I know it's a big question, but sort of, would you give scenarios, or would you just sort of read off the regs, or, you know?
I can give scenarios.
Yeah.
What happens when we get a noise complaint? What happens, you know, a restaurant, the exhaust fan isn't working and all of a sudden the neighborhood smells. How does that get handled? So yeah, I think we could do some scenarios for that.
Because if there are any just generally like NIMBY type of reaction, you know, to the presentation, I think that might be the big one for some folks.
Yeah, and the reason why I mentioned law enforcement, because aren't they creating a new safety program, if I'm not mistaken? Like, what was that one they had before, where they were helping people, bringing them up there to the hospital, things to that aspect? I forgot the name of it. Act Now, something. I forgot. God, Tom might know. It's a program that they did that worked with HCRS and with the Turning Point.
Yeah, I think I'll echo Sue that we want to keep it limited to zoning. If there's anything else about the public forum, if not 10 minutes over, like usual. I thought we'd have the first on time finished meeting.
You're paying that bill, Tom.
Unfortunately, it's elusive. Maybe next month. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Prudence gave the thumbs up after
Hey,
Gary.
there you go,
We'll just
Prudence.
pretend that we flip time around.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't count, there being no other business, I adjourn this meeting. Multiple ways to do it.